All right, so hello everyone. My name is Vikas Agarwal. I'm the founder of AIF and PMS Experts India. So firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the participants for taking their time out from their busy schedule and joining me today. With me today, I have Kenneth and Ruchi from Old Bridge Investments. Well, it's a very special day. I think it took me some time to get an opportunity to book his calendar and get him on the show of Ask the Expert. So at AIF and PMS Experts India, we have taken the lead of educating and empowering investors with more knowledge and wisdom from portfolio managers. And this is one special day where I have Kenneth with me. Kenneth is perhaps one of the old and one of the best portfolio managers in India, and has spent over 30 years in capital markets. So he's the CIO at Old Bridge, and before that he had worked with large organizations like IDFC as Chief Investment Officer. In fact, Ruchi had a chance to work with him in his previous organization. So, it's an in sync, same team working together at Old Bridge and trying to deliver the deliverables in the head of investors. So, thank you so much for accepting our request, Kenneth. It is pleasure to have you in our show called Ask the Expert.
Thank you, Vikas. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you, Ruchi, for helping us to put up this beautiful show. There are a lot of requests from a lot of investors, and they wanted me to request Kenneth to come on the show and speak to our investors.
Pleasure. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining in today.
Thank you. So the format of the show is very simple, Kenneth. What we do is we typically tend to ask few questions on behalf of our investors. And these are the questions that we keep getting from a number of investors. And then we'll come to the topic which we've decided, and then we can run the presentation. So the first question in my mind is, Kenneth, you spent more than 30 years. In fact, I think you began your career with Sharekhan, if I'm not wrong, long back. And, very difficult to sort of share your experience of 30 years. But if you could share some highlights about your 30 years of experience, how did you look at markets and how do you look at now?
Sure, Vikas. I actually started in 1990, and my first assignment used to be with a magazine called Capital Market Magazine. Sharekhan happened to me in 2000. Okay, Kotak happened to me in 2003, and then IDFC took over in 2005, which was earlier called Standard Chartered. And then I decided to venture out by myself with Old Bridge Capital Management. I think it's been a significant learning process, and all I can say is that the experience has been very enriching. I think the biggest highlight of my career, or biggest highlight that what brought me up to this stage, is between 1990 and 2000. It was a very strange period because we hardly saw a bull market after the Harshad Mehta collapse. Right? You had FIS come into the marketplace, and that was a temporary bull market on a very select few companies that went up. But most of the 90s, you very rarely made money. It was very unlike what we did in the last decade, or even probably in the previous decade. And corrections were quite, they weren't as severe as they are today, but they used to actually grind down. But over that period of time, I think the only content that we gathered out there, it was difficult to get content, and it was difficult to get information, which is quite easy right now. So we used to get content, and we used to try and analyze most of the content. So that gave me a breadth of coverage. So unlike analysts, what they normally do is they go deep, they take a deep dive into an entire business. There, I tended to cover a lot more companies, a lot more businesses, and all of them used to come from the smaller part of the market. And it used to be interesting because what it helped me develop is a like for monoline companies. Now, monoline companies are companies that are to just one part of their, they just have one product line, or they have just one category of business that it caters to. And I think that was the biggest learning experience that I had. I realized over a long period of time that companies do best at what they are good at. Okay, and till date, if I just follow that principle, I just follow that principle and what companies and what businesses and companies, uh, uh, businesses and companies that did what they were good at doing. Right. So we never bought second. So we never bought number two in the industry. We never bought number three in the industry. We just bought companies that are good at what they were doing, and that's helped me through this entire journey. So 2005 or 2003 to 2020, which was my actual fund management experience, I simply applied that concept. Initially, it came very intuitively. After that, I made it a practice to push back on any business which is significantly diversified.
Okay. So, Kevin, you are known as one of the best brains for equities in India. And those days when you began your career, you used to have limitation in terms of having access to balance sheets. And, I'm taking you back to 90s and, there were very few minds. So, when was the time when you decided that you will kind of focus more on equities as an asset class instead of looking at all the asset classes?
Okay, there was never a period of time that I looked beyond equities. I can tell you that much. So I started off in 90s. I was an investor in 85 to 87. Okay. I did lose a lot of money in 1991. I did lose a lot of money again in year 2000. Okay. In 1991, it wasn't my money. It was my parents' money. In year 2000, it was my money. Okay. So it's been a long journey. And there has been enough of learning experiences, and there's been enough of money lost, which I end up jokingly call tuition fees paid. Okay, and that's the cycle that. So to answer your question, there's never been a case where I've ever even looked at another asset class.
So you've been always very passionate about equities. The other thing is, Kevin, there are many names in the industry, right from Page Industries to a couple of them. You're the first one to, deep dive your own research and able to identify them at an early stage. I remember that categorically. So would you be able to throw some more lights? How did you manage to visualize their growth in the early stage of their growth curve?
I would be completely wrong if I said I knew what was going to happen with Page Industries. Or in the previous cycle, it used to be MRF. Or sometime back, or during the same cycle in 2004, 2005, I also held a company called Coromandel Fertilizers. And I even do hold it now. So I'd be wrong to believe that I could actually see the future. I think at most you can see maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years into the future, if you are lucky. Okay. But there are a couple of things that you have to tick the box when it comes to it all. A company needs to be good at what it does. Okay. You have to be early into that entire business. Okay. And when you're early into that entire business, you have to make sure your margin of safety is extremely high. And as you navigate the course right from entering a business on a yearly basis, you have to make sure that the company never loses market share. It has to continue to remain focused on what it does and do it at its optimal best. The best place to actually buy these businesses is in a down cycle. Okay, so when you look at an MRF, whether you look at a Page Industries or whether you look at a company which I held since its IPO, which is a Kaveri Seeds, there will be a lot of events and there'll be a lot of times where you will be forced to be shaken out of that portfolio. And you will also encounter cyclical trends in it. So every industry goes through a down cycle, even if it's a consumer business. But when you are going through a down cycle, you have to be sure and very sure that the company is gaining market share in a down cycle. Okay. And he has to have financial discipline. So once all of that is in place, when the market rebounds, this company comes back with enormous amount of cash flows. And you've seen that happen time and again, because in a down cycle, the competition disappears. Which is why, as a company, whichever company you own in whichever industry, it has to continue to get more market shares. And this entire piece of investing or this entire structure, I learned because I've been investing in the sugar business since 1997.
Oh,
Okay, in 1999, there was only one profit-making company in the entire country. Okay, and that company is the largest today. I have never seen a debt-free balance sheet in sugar in my entire investing career. Today, you will get more than one company who's debt-free. So think about how that cycle is evolved. So yes, I don't try and predict the future. You are given a certain data point. You got to interpret that data point at present, and you look at the company's past performance to see how the business has behaved, and just ride through a down cycle with the company. I think over a decade or over 2 decades, you make all your money through that cycle.
so Kenneth, you talked about you know nobody can predict the markets, but when you put the foundation of Old Bridge for the first time, and thereafter you saw the market started falling. So I know you can never get the timing right, but did you ever think that it will happen, or how is it? What was the trigger in your mind when you're planning to start this portfolio management services?
No, I guess I got out. I'm one of those few lucky professionals who like to do what they who like to do what he does and make a career out of it. Okay, and that's what has brought me here. So after a point in time, though every organization I've worked with contributed immensely to what I have become, but after a point in time, it was more of the same. So I stepped out. I tried to do things on my own terms, and we were lucky. We were lucky to have a down cycle so early in our life cycle. Okay, and that's also a learning process. So I guess the entire team is much more mature after what has happened over the last 5 years, and we just finished 5 years, and we're extremely lucky to be where we are after 5 years. And the investors who have stayed behind and who are there with us currently have benefited through the entire process. Okay, so I get so that's what we've done so far.
Great, great. So, Kenneth, the last question from my end before we come to the topic. So, you're one of the most respected name when it comes to equity, the way you manage funds at IUFC. Then, what was the point what was the reason that you decided that your 30 years of career is one side and then you started to build this organization? What was the reason, if I may ask you?
Well, nothing specific. It's just about investing in a certain style. When you work at an institution, you are forced to adopt multiple styles. You are forced to chase an index. And that's not my style. And as I talk through the session, you will know that we are not index chasers. We don't want to do better than the index. Okay, we want to do better than what we've done in the past. Okay, and I think that's what we set out to do.
In order to come out of those chasing index on a monthly basis, chasing NAV, etc.
Yeah, that's another style of investing which I'm happy to leave behind.
Sure, sure. So coming to Ruchi now that Ruchi is also there on the call, and I have the privilege of asking one question to her as well. So Ruchi, you've been working with Kenneth for quite some time. If I may ask you, what is your biggest learning so far?
So I'll say my biggest learning has been unlearn whatever you have learned. So I came from a banking background and then a couple of AMCs. And then I met Kenneth, and his overall style, as you mentioned at the start, is very different, I would say. So we don't talk about value growth, etc. I mean, market may bucket us in any manner. But from the first day when I sat with him to understand what we do and what our overall product scheme is, till now, I can say there is not a single day when I hear him. There's a very different style of looking at businesses, his entire approach of looking at balance sheets, looking at inherent, overall ability of the business, cycles, and how he picks businesses. It's nothing to do with, it's a very standalone approach. One can obviously talk about it bottoms up, but it's a very, I would say a very different. And I'm not saying it because I keep telling him, he said, you should not say it because you've been working with me for almost 2 decades now. But as an investor and even as a person who would look at his style of investing from outside, I would say he captures trends and can envisage a particular business and its overall journey. It's a different thought process. We look at businesses differently is what I can say. And that's what we have set out here. In a couple of slides, we would try to summarize today to all the viewers here in terms of how we look at businesses and how we look at investing. Kenneth's style of investing, if I may say.
So it's like there is a saying that if you keep on doing the same thing again and again, you tend to develop some sort of having worked with him for almost 2 decades, probably you would understand how do you go about identifying those companies at an early stage of their growth, and how do you ride through those journeys also equally important.
Exactly. And there is, as you very rightly said, when you keep doing it day to day, you don't see it any other way. So now every person in the team, I can say, who has worked with Kenneth, all of us, there's a little impression of Kenneth in us. So when we go to, when we look around, so he says, look around trends. In 2007, when we were building a portfolio of consumer businesses, he has this style. So all of us developed that style. You look at the Maggie batch number, you look at Page Industries batch number, the inventory date and all. You pick up trends. So today you pick up the trends of QSRs, so you look around how, if people are talking about ESG, if people are talking, so look around things like waste management, water, utilities, commodity after even before the pandemic, he mentioned it's at a decadal low. So, you just become part of it, that overall thought process.
Yeah,
so it's interesting.
Kenneth, So Kenneth, this is something, and I've got, I think, more than 10 questions in my career, and investors wanted to know, how does it happen? How does Kenneth able to identify those mega trends at an early stage? So is there anything that you can share for our benefit of our investors? You're on mute, I think.
So it's fairly simple. The answers are all out there, right? When you look at an entire industry and the entrepreneur has stopped investing in those capacities, someday demand is going to outstrip supply. Everyone, go back about a year and a half, and I used to go out and say that the last coal-based power plant that came up in India that got commissioned, it was in 2014. Okay, today when power utilities actually do well, or when IPPs are actually doing well on a stock market perspective, it's a simple thing that demand outstrips supply because the supply didn't exist. It is not that demand grew, supply didn't exist. You just had 1 6-month period of demand spiking somewhere and everyone scrambling around for everything else. So always look for underinvestment, and also always look at overinvestment, because one of the key to success is also to avoid mistakes. And always look for overinvestment it's all out there. It's all in cumulative balance sheets. So that's the only limited thing we do.
Great amount of learning, I think. Ruchi, we'll start the presentation. Like, you want to put up any slides? So we'll come to the topic, and also if you could throw lights on your investment philosophy, which you follow at Old Bridge.
Sure. I will take over, Vikas, and what we do is Ruchi will manage the back end of the presentation, and also chip in where she thinks I've missed out something. But there is a lot of conversation happening about markets being expensive, right? And we thought it would be topical to look at what history has to offer us in terms of our learnings. And we've got a couple of slides on that part of it all. Okay, and then look at it from a forward point of view. And now, when I talk about a forward point of view, I will step into the economic or the corporate cycle, and to try and establish as to why, where is the corporate balance sheet there. So we'll just tie these two things in and take it forward. So topical enough today is everyone saying that markets are expensive, and at the other extreme, all the IPOs are getting subscribed at valuations that you haven't seen before. So it's usually a herd instinct that brings the market down. So, and that's exactly what is happening out here. But if you look at 3 decades of the marketplace as we have been in, right? The 90s was 1 decade, the 2000s was 1 decade, and the third decade was the decade that we came out of, which was the decade of decade between 2011 and 2020. So the first decade, and we highlighted through 3 companies. One is Hindustan Levers, and the third one is Larsen and Toubro. Now, these are not a random set of companies that we picked up. We picked up Infy because it was the flagship of the outsourcing economy. We picked up L&T because it's the flagship of the investment economy, and the third one is the flagship of the consumer economy. And I'll explain this a little bit. So this is what happened in the 90s. Infy never got subscribed. The issue never got subscribed in 1993. After its IPO, it traded at 25 times earnings for a very long period of time, and nobody understood why it traded at that time, till it traded at 200 times multiple in year 2000. Okay, it did extremely well in terms of profitability. It became one of India's largest export earners. And this is what the stock price did. So during that period of time, it had all the tailwinds. It had the rupee depreciation, it had India's largest workforce, you had the Y2K problem, and it wasn't just Infosys that did well. I mean, all the IT companies did well. You look at Penta Media, HFCL, DSQ, all those names that don't exist today. Okay, then you also had the Wipros, you also had TCS, which was not listed at that point in time. You also had Mphasis, which was not listed at the time, and there were so many other businesses that were there. But this was what happened in the 90s. So Infy did extremely well. But what the marketplace actually did during that period of time, okay, it actually took the stock and it took it up to 200 time multiple and it kept it there. And that's where it happened. You priced in all future growth in perpetuity. And that was what high price earning multiples actually meant. And this was an expensive market in year 2000, in year 2000, right? But it was an issue that got undersubscribed. But look at the other 2 businesses. They hardly did anything. So Hindustan Lever did a 33% return, which was a great return for a 7-8 year period. Okay, but L&T did nothing, which was 18%. It looks high at 18%, but inflation rates were double digit at that point in time. So 90s inflation rate was double digit, and L&T didn't do anything at that point in time. So L&T actually moved to almost a 7 times earnings in when Infy was hitting 200 times earnings, and then the cycle flipped. Okay, the cycle flipped. There was some negative news. And Infy actually underperformed for the rest of the decade. It became almost the weakest performer along with Levers. Okay, and because you had a low price multiple business in L&T and it had tailwinds, it went on to trade at 60 times earnings. So that was a P re-rating of L&T, and that was the de-rating of Infy and Hindustan Levers. Now, the point I'm trying to put out here is market was expensive in 2000, but when you exited 2009, if you were in the right place, you made an enormous amount of money. If you were in the right place, so the opportunity is always there. Okay, and it's just your ability to capture those cycles that are there, and virtually the entire cycle, like I said in the past, comes through when people stop investing in the business. I mean, how many contracting construction companies did you know in the 90s? Okay, L&T also put up a cement plant. Okay, but finally had to sell it because cement was not such a great business for L&T also. And that's what you Ultratech. And Ultratech is one of the world's largest cement company today, right? And this is the cycle that went through here. Now, when we exit 2008 or January or that, when you look at L&T at 60 times multiple, the next question was, can 60 go to 100? Okay. And that's what happened in between 2008 to 2020. Levers, which was at 1.3 times, gave you a less than 2% return for a decade, actually turned out to be the best performing stock in this decade. Why? It had valuations on its side, and then it hit a growth cycle. During that period of time also, there was only one company that actually invested in its brands, which was a company called Dabur. Everyone else, every other FMCG business actually consolidated itself. You had Tata sell out of FMCGs. Okay, you had the Balsaras go out. And a lot of other smaller businesses actually got integrated with everyone else. So capacities actually came down. And what you had was a slight movement, slight supply was constrained, and you had the consumer economy, and that's where you got it here. You never heard, and this is contextual because you never heard of any of this. You never heard of any of the NBFCs prior to 2010. Okay, and consumer finance and consumer businesses actually led the last decade. So Bajaj Finance came in after 2010, 11, 12, though the foundation of the business came in before that. And by the time 2015 came afterwards, you had a horde of new companies that came in wanting to do financial services, which is also what is happening right now. So the trend that we are facing out here, okay, is consumers led the economy. They're right at the top, and there's been a massive underinvestment in manufacturing. I mean, you haven't had new steel capacities come up, you haven't had new power capacities come up, and what you're facing right now is a slight shrinkage or a very tight supply in terms of capacities that have not been invested in, and that's what's creating an opportunity for a new cycle. Okay, so this is a distinction between, so what we're trying to say is that none of these businesses are bad, but they all go through a down cycle. And what are down cycles? Okay, down cycles are simply the fact that price earning multiples sometimes also come down. And in this case, if you look at whether it's Infy, L&T or levers, and we'll show you the next chart, which is Infosys. The light blue line is Infosys. Okay. But while the stock price continued to go up, the price earning multiple actually came down. It adjusted to the growth. So once the business gets mature, you adjust to growth. It happened with Infosys. It's happened with L&T. Okay, and this is L&T. So you've seen L&T peak at 60 times earnings in 2007, 2008. And come all the way down to 12 times earnings and been between 12 and 20 times for a long period of time. And you've seen what has happened with Levers. Levers is also traded at 24 times multiples in 2008 and 2009, before it's gone to almost 80 times multiple, which is where it was trading some time back. So if we are in the right place at the right time, valuations actually don't matter so much, but you have to be with good companies at all point in time, but make sure that you get them at a cyclical low. And that's what our attempt has always been as far as a portfolio manager is concerned, from a strategy point of view. So that's the decadal shifts, the 3 decadal shifts that we've had. The other interesting slide that I can put together is about market cycles itself. Okay, we've broken up the index. We've broken up the index into 3 buckets. One is in 2008. And if you were in 2008, okay, corporate banks was 9.5%, which is all the public sector banks, including ICICI. Commodities was 17% of your index. Utilities was about 10% of your index, which included Reliance Power and Reliance Energy, etc. Okay, capital goods was 7%, telecom was 11%, infra and construction was 7.5%, Reliance was about 15%, Reliance continues to be 15% today, right? So if you've had consensus, you were just in one part of the marketplace. And this was a basket. So if I go back to the L&T slide, the L&T example, Larsen was trading at 60 times and everything aligned with that investment economy was trading at that high valuations there. And the rest of the market was ignored. Okay, so you had Levers and ITC as FMCG businesses that were in the marketplace, or that were listed, and nothing else was listed on the index at that point in time. You had only one consumer NBFC, which was on the index, and that was HDFC. Right? We had only one private sector retail bank that was there, and that was 2% of the marketplace, which was HDFC Bank. Right? So this was what the marketplace looked like in 2008. Okay, and this was an expensive market 2008. 2020, 21, we're an expensive market, but look how expensive and where the consensus is. You will figure out where the market is expensive today. Today, consumer NBFCs, which is HDFC, and both the Bajajes are at 9.5% of the index. You got consumer banks, which is 22.5% of the index, which is all your consumer banks from an HDFC to a Kotak to an IndusInd, etc. All are there. And then you have a large microfinance business, which is in the small caps or in the breadth of the market indices. Then you have consumers, which are very large, and then you have consumer automotives, which are very large. And that's where all the crowding out in investor money is taking place. And the ones that are completely ignored are the ones that did extremely well in the previous decade, right? So there's a lot of money that shifted to the other extreme. So the thing is that expensive markets are okay, but where would you want to be in this cycle is what you need to choose. Okay, there's a multiple ways of interpreting this data. I mean, so if you get, but the thing is about interpreting it right, and this is our interpretation of where the market cycle is currently. So we are there, and I think the only two things that you need to take, one thing that you need to take away from these two slides is, has market leadership changed? Okay, and if market leadership has changed, okay, what is the category of businesses that are leading this market leadership change that is there? Okay, so how do I define market leadership change? This is a slide, and just concentrate on the right-hand side of the market, right-hand side of the graph. And these are numbers which you will get out of any electronic database. So the slide on the right talks about the market cap by all your FMCG companies plus your paint companies. So any consumer-facing business is trading at 16,50,000 crores of market cap. They delivered a PBT of 35,300 crores in March 2021. Okay, on the right-hand side, another one company did the same amount of PBT and trades at 1,40,000 crores of market cap. Okay, for the same amount of profit, at one extreme you're getting very large market cap, and the other one you're paying almost 8% of market capitalization. So you have to define as to what are the expensive markets and where is the profitability in the cycle actually moved. And this is again a similar structure. So I can put a Hindalco there, I can put another metal business out there, it will come to the same thing, but I'm just taking cases out here. You just look at a JSW Steel EBITDA per ton and look at Maruti EBITDA per car and see who's got pricing power now. In history, whoever had pricing power had market cap. Look at who's got pricing power right now. And our sense is that a company that gets pricing power will eventually get a market capitalization. And that's the shift in what we see. A profit shift is already there. The question that remains to be answered is that will market capitalizations follow? I am not saying it will follow, but this is where my portfolio is placed, or this is what we think has happened. And this has happened in the future. We're only replicating what our experience has shown us in the future, in the past. Okay, so this is in context of expensive markets. So market can be expensive, but look where the denominator is, where the E of the price earning multiple has moved fastest. Okay, and if you allocate money to everything that is earning money, the numerator will follow over a period of time, because we as investors allocate capital, okay, to the earnings of a business, to the cash flow of a business, and that's how the cycle will essentially play out for us. So that's where I come to in terms of expensive markets. I think that markets are expensive, but you have to define as to where the expensive part of the market is sitting, and allocate capital, and just be a little long term in nature, because you will have to go through cyclicality, and you will definitely have to go through volatility of your entire underlying portfolio. Now I'll summarize what I mean. Well, these have been charts of individual businesses industries, companies, etc., and they're pure charts that are there in terms of price.
So I'll just make one announcement. So all those participants who have any questions, please type in your questions in Q&A box. In the meantime, we'll be having discussion, and post that I'll start taking your questions. So please type your questions in Q&A box, not in the chat box. Over to you, Kenny. Thank you.
Yes. So I just summarize it as to what we think is happening with the corporate cycle. Now, these are a lot of numbers out there, right? And for all of us who have been out for the last 3 decades, it makes sense to go. I mean, I like going through this numbers at all points in time. I've been running this screener, or I would say screener, but I was running this chart ever since 2013, 14, or maybe a little earlier than that. And it's pointed me into all the right directions. So the health of a business is known because of the leverage it has, or how much indebted it is. Right. So when a company is indebted, the first thing, or any individual is indebted, the first thing that comes to everyone's mind is that I have to pay down debt. Right. And that is what one of these columns actually state. So if I point towards the total debt equity column, and this is from 1999, and this is the NSE 500 companies minus banks. Okay, from a debt equity of 1, we went down to 0.6, 0.7 in 2005, 6, 7. Okay, before we went back to 1 in 2013. Okay, and then we came back to 2021, where we are back to an all-time low. Now, key to this is you pick up your market cycle itself, right? When you are at 0.7 and going down to 0.6 and 0.7, 0.8, you probably had the biggest bull market that you've ever seen in the last cycle. Or you have the biggest profit growth in the cycle, and which came with a lot of ROEs, and we all extrapolated that, and that's what happened. And that's the start of the next capex cycle that has come. I think we are in a position to do that all over again. We ended 2021 with a debt equity of 0.7. If you look at most of the numbers coming through with all the commodity businesses, and next time the utility businesses, they will be deleveraging the balance sheets even further. And that's going to take us the balance sheet to a very, very sweet spot. Now, this is coming at a time when your turnover or your capacity utilization is down to almost 65%. And this we notified, or we signal it with the asset turnover business. Okay, from an asset turnover point of view, we're down to 62%. We went to 90% historically. So you've got an under leveraged balance sheet, and you're running at an economy of 65%. This year it will be slightly higher, but next year if you go to 75 and 80% with the same efficiency, the amount of cash flow that this economy can throw out will be significantly large. So you got cash flow coming with no incremental amount of capex, probably some working capital. Okay, and it's going to be very high in terms of capital efficiency. So I wouldn't be surprised if we go to an ROE column which is at 21, 22%, which we had in 2005, 6, 7. So very clearly, we need a significantly high ROE, which I think we will come. And ROE is, I mean, if you get a reasonable return on your capital, okay, in 20% plus, it signifies a lot of things. It signifies the fact that industry has got pricing power. Okay, it signifies that debt at 6% or 7% availability. If I put capital on the ground, if I put new capacity on the ground at 6 and 7% cost of debt, and I'm ending up with 20% plus return on my equity, the spread is almost 14-15% that I get as an entrepreneur. So nothing drives capital investment as much as return on your capital. And I think we are all set. We are all ready for that cycle right now. The moot point and the key point is what could drive it, what could drive demand, and what could drive capital investment, what could absorb all the capacity on the ground. And there are plenty of opportunities that are surfacing up. I think here we don't have any slides to talk about, but I think there's one single point that I want to make is the world's largest manufacturer has stopped selling or has stopped exporting products which are cheap. Okay, they have stopped selling deflation. And if the world's largest manufacturer stops exporting deflation, that means inflation is back and inflation is here to stay. Inflation is very good for corporate profitability, specifically so from an India context where we still have some cost advantages. So our bets continue to be, and our place that we would like to invest continues to be on businesses that can go out and create an international footprint. Something that the Indian IT sector did, something that the Indian pharmaceutical business has done, something that the Indian chemical business is doing, or the agrochemical business is doing. And we would have that in engineering, we could have that in commodities, we could have that in automotives, and a whole host of other industries. Now remember, we are not alone in that cycle. Every country around us is also participating in their areas of dominance. Okay, so whoever has got better labor laws is participating with textiles or ready-made garments business. Okay, whoever has got natural resources and availability of quantifiable labor is driving industries that they are competent or they have cost advantages. Vietnam is feeding into China. Okay, Bangladesh has got feeding into the US and to Europe. Indonesia and Thailand have their own industries that they're doing extremely well, both in terms of agro exports and as well as manufactured exports. And we'll also find our way into that market. So I wouldn't say that this is an India-specific opportunity, though it appears to be, but it definitely is a larger profit cycle than we've seen before. Where will demand come in the long term? I think that's very simple. You take all the power plants in the world, okay, close them down and move them to renewable. What has been set up over the last 150 years, all has to be changed. If you change your entire automotive fleet, that's the other large opportunity that's coming through. And we will be a very large part of that supply chain that's coming up. Okay, so that opportunities exist. The opportunity exists because of a reason. We find ourselves, or the world finds ourselves, in a position where we can actually deliver large companies, bigger than what we've ever seen, and then create the employment out here, create the employment in India, and create a consumer economy finally. Okay, so I'm reasonably optimistic. I am not very comfortable with valuations, but nobody is. But like I said, there are places, and I took you through the entire cycle. There are places which are attractive. You will always find it in an environment. You will go through a volatility, but I think when you come out at the other end, it'll be extremely rewarding. Okay. I'd leave you with that, Vikas.
Yeah. Thank you so much for really a great insightful presentation. Kenneth, one question from my end. So when you look at the debt to equity ratio, one way of looking at it is, okay, balance sheets are not over leveraged and ratio looks good. But when you want to achieve this 21-22% kind of profitability that people are talking about, then you have to take capex, you have to take bigger loans, you have to take bigger projects, and that's where again the debt to equity ratio can change.
Of course, it will. It will come back again. I'm not saying it's going to be there perpetually. I say you got a 4-year window where it will not increase. You have to move your utilization from 65% to 90%, right? Why would I expand if I'm not utilizing my capacity? But by the time I hit 90% utilization, think about the cash flow I'm going to generate. Okay, so I've never said that we're not going to. That debt will come back. It's a cyclical play. Promoters at the top of the market put in more capacity than is required. So I say this: supply comes in. When supply comes in, there's nobody who brings in supply 10% per annum, right? Everyone puts in a brownfield capacity that brings in 50% more capacity, or a greenfield which brings in 100% more capacity, right? So supply will always move by 50% and 100%, but demand will only increase by 8% per annum. So we are in that sweet spot wherein if demand increases, we got capacity on the ground that can feed the demand. And that will generate your profitability.
But if you
then we will leverage.
Yeah, if you go back to 2015-16, a lot of people had the similar sort of anticipation that the underutilized capacity would move and then things will turn around. But it never happened. So if you look at last thing,
it's just about timing. It's just about timing, and you've seen it happen. I mean, in 2020 and 21, you've seen it happen, right? Capacity is, people who were expecting it come, it didn't come. But if you had the patience, it came. And you can see it happening in all your stock prices right now.
Agreed. And the other thing is, Kenneth, if you look at the global markets, especially your US markets, etc., this is one question which I wanted to ask you is, if you look at the construction of the NASDAQ index or maybe some of the large companies, their technology companies plays very, very important role. But unfortunately, in India, look at that is one area which is, I believe, is highly underutilized or not gone to the large extent of the way they have gone. So what are your views on that?
So the composition of the US market will also change. It's not going to remain what has been in the past. So remember, Amazon exited 2009, from 2001 to 2009 with a flat stock price. After that, it's done what it did. Okay, Apple, before the iPhone, was nothing. And then innovation brought them to what they are right now. So they also went into an investment cycle. So Amazon, it's not that Amazon didn't do anything between 2001 to 2009. It went into an investment cycle where its capital getting employed was generating a lower ROE till it started capturing the market. Okay, so if you look at all the steel companies, whether it's the Indian ones or whether it's ArcelorMittal, they went into a capex cycle or they went into a restructuring cycle where they made their processes extremely efficient before they got this profitability that came through, and no capacity came through.
So other question is, do you think that in India, government especially plays very important role? So they should really look at NBFCs, giving license to NBFCs who can really go out and give larger loans so that the large project can come in. Because last decade was a lost ground decade for us, and not heard any large project or large plant setting up in India, and the overall profitability is improving.
Actually, because there's a reason for that. Infrastructure, it's not that infrastructure projects didn't come up. Infrastructure projects over the last decade earned lower than the cost of capital. So you could have put as many NBFCs or you could have thrown as much money as you wanted to those projects. But if they're not profitable, why should anyone put them together? So India's bigger problem is we can't put in too much of capital on the ground because people are not willing to pay for it. And people are not willing to pay for it because our per capita GDP is only $2,000. So you have to move per capita GDP to $3,500 before you can see them pay for civic amenities. Because that was the inflection point for every single developing country that was there. So it's not that we needed large projects. We needed large projects, but nobody was willing to pay for them. Today, if everyone's going to be willing to pay for them, then it's fine. We will have large projects. And you will see that come up because you're willing to pay 110 rupees for petrol today. Right? So, which will mean that if the day you stop, which day you can't afford that price and electric vehicles are going to be cheaper, the movement to electric vehicles is going to come through. The movement to electrical vehicles is going to come through because of commercial reasons. It's not going to come through because the government is forcing it to do it.
If you look at Kenneth, between 2002 to 2009, I don't know what China did all things right or put together everything. Their economy grew from $2.5 trillion to $7.5 trillion. What are the 3-4 triggers that you see going ahead next decade? I'm talking. We looked at 90s, 2000, 2010. So what are the 3-4 things that you look at can happen or trigger points in the decade to come in this decade?
It's all there. Cost of finance, which is the cheapest it's ever been for India. Subsidies, which is the highest that you've ever seen before. Okay, and export incentives, which is the highest that you've ever seen before. Okay, and the fourth large one is the fact that you've got a global market right now. I think in this decade, you don't have to look for triggers. They already happened.
Great. So we'll take the question now. So the first question is, how long this expansion cycle will expand? That's question from Piyush.
This could last almost a decade. Okay, right now we're just filling the gap that the Chinese have vacated. And when I say we, as in we, India, along with all other countries that exist, okay, are filling the gap that the Chinese have existed. So what happens is India's largest cement plant or cement company is Ultratech with 140 million tons of cement, right? So US consumes 90 million tons of cement only. So what happens if US actually has a very large infrastructure rollout? India manufactures 2 times the amount of steel that the US manufactures because they used to import everything. So the growth driver and the growth engine is somewhere around. We just have to anchor ourselves around that growth engine. We might all have different opinions about it all. I mean, we're very clear as to what we want to do and how we want to anchor it. But I think growth is coming and this is going to be very long. So don't worry about how long it will be. First, let the valuation show up. And I showed you that one chart on where valuations stand in a certain industry versus a company. So even the profitability matrix is shift. Don't worry about how long it will last. I think by the time everyone figures out how long it will last, you will already made significant amount of capital.
So the next question is excellent understanding. Expensive defined by what numbers? Corporate cycle which pays and turnaround, signal identified by which number and factors?
I think it's clearly profitability. Okay, we are not investors who are going to. See, a lot of our investors also can't stomach a 20% down cycle or an underperformance in their portfolios. Okay, and there are a lot of investors. So if you and you will keep meeting investors who say they're long term, but once there's a 20% correction or once you underperform the marketplace, they are very averse to the market cycle. Right? But the same amount of investors are investing in companies that are losing money. Okay. That dichotomy I can never understand. Because you are on this entire... so investors are supposed to take money out of the business. Okay. Entrepreneurs are supposed to put money into the business. So you have to have a venture capital or a private equity mindset to fund these companies. Okay, my job and the fixed income market job or a public manager of businesses is supposed to make sure that companies have to pay me back in terms of higher profits every year. Okay, because it's not in my DNA to keep funding these companies for their losses.
You spent 30 years in the market, Kenneth, and you saw entire Indian market getting consolidated and then shaping up further. Now, if I may ask you, do you see that the Indian economy has a potential to become $10 trillion economy in terms of size 10, 15 years down the line?
So we're 20% of the world GDP, world population, and 3% of the GDP. So there's got to be a rebalancing somewhere. Okay, I won't want to put a number to it, but for all our I think for all hopefully, and it should happen over a longer term period, there will be a realignment of per capita GDP that will happen. What number? I have no idea.
Yeah, so if you look at the current size and calculate, then it comes to 18 trillion. I mean, I'm talking about from a current number perspective. So, yeah, what you're saying is right. there would be a, what are the concerns that you see next decade? Do you see some geopolitical risk coming through on our way, especially between India, China, Pakistan, this triangle becoming more difficult to handle?
I think extreme nationalism is going to be a concern that we will all grapple with. And the second is the environment. Both put together can be a very deadly cocktail. Okay, environment is going to hurt everything.
In the long run, do you think that rebalancing will happen? I mean, if not now, maybe 10 years, 15 years down the line.